A lost glove should not rest on a grave. A dead woman should not be able to move objects. And a duke, silent on matters of affection for 4 years, should not gaze at a stranger with the intensity of a man rediscovering a forbidden desire. Yet the pier glass at Thornhallow Manor had for 6 weeks presented him with a familiar face each morning, a face that defied its presence. He rationalized it as grief. He attributed it to the quirks of aged glass. He never voiced the truth he kept from all. The face was not directed at him. It looked past him. It watched the door, waiting. The Sutherland Autumn Ball commenced at 8. For Arabella Voss, it concluded at 11:45, not with the cessation of the orchestra, nor the dispersal of the final dance, but with the discovery, as she turned to address Lord Finsbury, that her right glove was gone. She distinctly recalled donning both gloves in her aunt's dressing room at Wraithmore Lodge. The left had snagged on its pearl wrist button. She remembered scrutinizing her reflection in the long landing mirror, applying the meticulous attention reserved for occasions where her aunt held strong opinions, and deemed the outcome satisfactory. The ivory kid leather reaching her elbow, the small amethyst brooch at her collar, her ink-dark hair impeccably pinned in a style Lady Constance had declared passable. From Lady Constance, this constituted genuine commendation. The precise moment the right glove vanished eluded her. This was the vexing part. It hadn't been a sudden event. It had simply ceased to be present, and she had remained oblivious until she was elsewhere. Raven Grange's ballroom pulsed with amber light, and the particular resonance that settles deep in the chest. A low, warm, layered hum. The orchestra a current beneath. Voices a tide above. Her aunt, Lady Constance Wraithmore, had circulated tirelessly since their arrival, clasping hands and exchanging pleasantries, and had not focused her attention on Arabella for over an hour. This afforded Arabella the freedom to indulge in her customary pastime at such gatherings, observing from the periphery. She had been told this was unsocial. Various individuals, at different stages of her life, had informed her that a 23-year-old woman, with her father's lineage and her aunt's connections, ought to be engaging with the room, not lingering at its edges. What they failed to grasp was that the edges were the crucible of intrigue. The room's core was a stage, the edges where true selves emerged. She noted the Marchioness of Sutherland had swapped the cream drapes for a deeper hue this year, a wine-colored silk that absorbed rather than reflected the candlelight. She observed the harpsichord in the alcove, recently polished but left closed, its lid a surface, not an instrument. She marked the couple near the clustered palms, silent, yet their silences possessed entirely distinct qualities depending on who initiated them. And she noticed the man by the east fireplace, who had remained stationary for the better part of an hour. He made no effort to be seen. This was her first insight. Most men at these events positioned themselves for maximum visibility, a specific angle to the lamplight, a glass held at chest height, a posture feigning ease while demanding notice. This man stood with his shoulder to the room, his gaze fixed beyond the nearest window, as if the fog pressing against the glass offered more insight than anything within the ballroom. He held a glass, but had not touched its contents. His coat, tailored with a simplicity that bespoke greater expense than ornamentation, and a white waistcoat, suggested a man who had weathered considerable outdoor exposure without significant alteration. He stood tall. His jaw was set with a deliberate neutrality. His hair, where the firelight found it, was the color of coal dust. Elsewhere, it was deeper still. Arabella had been informed prior to her arrival of his identity. The Duke of Thornhallow, Lord Rupert Ashwick, 35 years old, a widower. His presence at this particular ball owed to Lady Sutherland's dispatch of 3 distinct invitations, and her understanding of persistence as a form of courtesy. She had also been told, for her aunt deemed it vital context, that the Duke's wife had died 4 years prior, that Duchess Dorinda had been discovered at the base of Thornhallow Manor's North Cliff Walk in October of 1901, that no inquest had yielded a verdict beyond accidental, that the Duke had abstained from all public gatherings for 2 years thereafter. Arabella averted her gaze. She placed her untouched glass of negus on a nearby table and drifted along the edge of the dancers. The room's long southern wall was punctuated by tall pier glasses. 6 in all set between the windows, in identical gilded frames. Each was positioned to capture the overhead chandelier and return its light into the room. She passed the first and second without a glance. At the third, she paused. The reflection was amiss. Not overtly, not in the manner of a sensational tale. It was a subtle distortion of proportion. The unsettling sensation that the room reflected behind her was not quite the room she inhabited. The width felt slightly off, the depth, and the window visible at the mirror's far edge was not that of Raven Grange's ballroom. Its frame was narrower, the glass older, possessing that peculiar wavering quality born of decades of settling within its lead. She still wore both gloves. She confirmed this by inspecting her own hands in the mirror, assuring herself the reflection was indeed hers. It was. But the room behind her was not Raven Grange. She turned. The ballroom wall stood behind her in solid, ordinary reality. Wine-colored silk, bracket candles, Lord Finsbury approaching with an expectant air. She responded to his remark. Her voice remained steady. She avoided the mirrors for the remainder of the evening, and as she and her aunt collected their coats and proceeded to the waiting carriage, her gaze remained fixed ahead. But she passed the line of mirrors one final time. She did not look directly at any of them. She didn't need to. The absence of reflection was palpable, like the chill in an empty room, not for what it contained, but for what had been withdrawn. The mirrors held nothing. Outside, the fog lay thick upon the drive. Arabella sat in the carriage, her hands folded in her lap, the right ungloved, the left not, and remained silent on the journey home. He walked to the churchyard each morning. This was no secret at Thornhallow, yet it remained unspoken. The staff had over 4 years accommodated this routine, with the quiet efficiency of those who understood some matters were not for public discourse. Finch ensured the morning schedule allowed for the Duke's absence between 6 and 7:15. Mrs. Sable, housekeeper, since the 3rd year of the previous Duke's tenure, whose loyalty to the current Duke had long transcended the need for reasons, ensured no one ventured up the north path before 7:30. It cost nothing. It was not discussed. It was simply done. The churchyard perched on a rise above the formal gardens, sheltered on its northern flank by yew trees, so ancient their roots had fractured and displaced the stone path beneath. 11 Ashwick graves in all, the oldest dating to 1742. Rupert could have navigated its contours in utter darkness, a feat he had accomplished twice during the first winter after Dorinda's death, though he kept no record of those occasions. He stopped at her grave, as was his custom. He had ceased bringing flowers in the 2nd year, unable to discern if they were for her or for himself, a dissatisfying ambiguity. The glove rested across the inscription stone, not fallen, not blown by the wind. Laid, flat, fingers pointing toward the carved letters, wrist opening outward, precisely as if offered. He regarded it for a long while before reaching for it. Ivory kid leather, elbow length with a small pearl wrist button, an evening glove, a right-hand glove, a detail he registered with an inexplicable focus. The latched churchyard gate was visible from his vantage point, its iron arm lowered, undisturbed. The yew trees presented no gaps wide enough to admit a wind capable of transporting anything from the drive, even if a glove had been near the drive, which it had not. He picked it up. It felt cold and dry. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at the inscription, which still bore only Dorinda's name and dates, for he had never settled on the accompanying words, eventually concluding that indecision was preferable to error. Dorinda Catherine Ashwick, née Aldbourne, 1874-1901. He lingered there longer than usual, the glove in his hand, the yew trees rustling their particular song in the morning wind, the house below sending its first thin plume of kitchen smoke into the storm-grey October sky. Then he walked back down. At breakfast he ate and perused the Morning Post, issuing instructions to Cavendish for the week's drainage work on the South Meadow. He mentioned nothing of the glove until 9 o'clock, when he inquired of Finch, in the tone reserved for minor administrative matters, whether any lost property had been reported after the Sutherland ball. He read the reply twice. Then he folded it and held it for a moment, his thoughts a confluence of indistinct impressions. He dispatched a brief formal note. If Miss Voss would call at Thornhallow at her convenience before noon, the glove would be returned to her. He placed the glove in the shallow drawer of the entry hall table, beneath the silver card tray, and returned to his discussion with Cavendish. Cavendish sat at the desk in the estate office, his ledgers open to the week's accounts. He was a methodical man. This was his chief professional asset, consistently displayed. Thin-faced, self-contained, with a stillness born not of ease, but of a habit for strict boundaries. He had managed the Thornhallow estate for 6 years. He had arrived with strong references from 2 previous households, neither of which Rupert had thought to contact directly during the first year. When Dorinda was alive, the estate ran smoothly, and there was no particular impetus for close scrutiny. He had scrutinized nothing in those years. This was the truth he now carried 4 years later, with no place to lay it down. They reviewed the South Meadow figures, everything balanced. He thanked Cavendish and left the office, walked through the hall, did not open the shallow drawer, and proceeded to the library, where he stood for a time before the north-facing window, which offered a view of the churchyard yews. She arrived at 11:15. The house defied her expectations. Her aunt's veiled comments about Thornhallow had hinted at a grandeur of the previous century, towers, formal approaches, a facade that announced itself from half a mile. Instead, she found something longer, lower, and quieter. Its stone the color of a dull blade in the morning light, its windows large, evenly spaced, and inexplicably watchful. The house did not dominate. It observed. She attributed this to the weather. The entry hall was not dim. Gas lamps illuminated 2 corners. A Persian runner stretched down the center of the flagstone floor. A long mahogany table bore a silver card tray. A portrait of the previous duke hung above the mantel, and on the wall directly opposite the entrance, the pier glass. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, framed in ebony carved with a repeating motif along its entire perimeter. She examined the carving as she waited, what she first took for a botanical pattern, leaves ascending into stems and branches, then, upon closer inspection, resolved itself into something else. Hands. Dozens of them carved at the wrist, their fingers transforming into stems, reaching upward into the larger form of the frame with the patient determination of something yearning for light. She was still observing it when the Duke entered. He emerged from a door on the left, not the formal door, not the door a host used for callers, in shirt sleeves, coat absent, waistcoat grey, sleeves rolled to the elbow in a manner that would have suggested carelessness in another man. In him, it simply indicated he had not considered it. He held her glove in his right hand. "Miss Voss," he stated, "Your Grace." She maintained her composure, grateful without effusiveness, formal without stiffness. "You are most kind to have kept it. It was on Dorinda's grave this morning." He delivered the statement without preamble. Not unkindly, but without the preparation such an utterance required, as if he had carried the decision to speak it since breakfast and had finally set it down. She had been reaching for the glove. Her hand froze. "I cannot explain its presence there," he continued. "The gate was latched. The glove was laid on the stone, placed, not fallen. I seek to understand." She met his gaze. His storm-grey eyes held hers without urgency, devoid of the social momentum most men applied to silence. He awaited an honest answer, prepared to wait until it came. "I lost it at the ball," she said. "I did not approach the churchyard. I have never been to Thornhallow before today." She paused. "I have no explanation." He weighed her answer, accepted it. "Finch will bring tea," he said. "Would you be seated?" It was not entirely a question. They sat in the small reception room off the hall, not the drawing room, she noted, not the formal space, and tea arrived swiftly, prepared in anticipation. She recounted the incident with the mirror at Raven Grange, not all at once. She narrated it chronologically. The distorted proportions of the room, the unfamiliar window frame, the absence of her reflection in the hall mirrors as she departed. He listened with an attentiveness beyond mere politeness. He did not interrupt. He offered no reassurances of rational explanations. He listened like a man who had been awaiting corroboration. "I have seen her too," he said when she finished. "In the pier glass every morning for 6 weeks. Only in the morning and only briefly, and always looking past me toward the door." He set down his cup. I told myself it was the age of the glass, the quality of the lead in the panes. He looked at her directly. I tell you this now so you know I sought other explanations first. What does she look like? She is... He paused. Small-boned, pale hair, a dress of perhaps 10 years ago. The woman in the mirror at Raven Grange had been small-boned with pale hair, and her dress had been of a style no longer fashionable. Arabella remained silent. He observed her silence. "You have seen her," he prompted. "Yes." Something in the room shifted. Not the light, not the temperature, but the quality of attention between them, as if two separate inquiries had just converged into one. "Her name was Dorinda," he said. "She died here 4 years ago. I do not know why she remains." He glanced at the closed hall door where the pier glass stood. "I am beginning to think it is because there is something she has not completed." He had not intended to invite her back. The note he sent, 2 mornings later, offered a reason that was accurate as far as it went. The Thornhallow gallery housed a collection of portraits spanning 7 Ashwick generations, and he understood from Lady Constance that Miss Voss had served 2 years as assistant cataloguer to a portraiture scholar in Bristol. If she wished to view the collection, she was welcome Thursday afternoon. The reason omitted the fact that Dorinda's portrait hung in this house, and that the woman Arabella had described in the mirror, her height, her colouring, her attire, the specific way she avoided eye contact with the viewer, matched it with a precision no casual visitor could have fabricated. She arrived at 2. He personally guided her through the gallery, a task he had not undertaken since the winter of 1901. The portraits lined the east wall in chronological order, 6 generations of Ashwicks, each a variation on the same angular inheritance. He highlighted those with interesting provenances: a Lely copy from 1698, a Lawrence original from 1818. Her questions were specific, revealing a familiarity with such works, not merely a superficial viewing. At the gallery's end, before the window overlooking the north gardens and in the distance the churchyard yew trees, there was a void, a lighter rectangle on the wall, the plaster where a painting had hung for years, now removed. He stopped. She stopped beside him. "That was hers," he said. "I had it moved to the lumber room. I could not—" He paused, then he spoke a truth he had shared with no one. "I was not certain in the first year that I had been a good husband to her. She had desired London. I kept her here. I told myself she would find it sufficient, and I did not inquire often enough whether she did." He gazed at the empty rectangle. The portrait showed her as she appeared when observed. I preferred not to see it. A long silence settled. Outside, a wind swept in from the sea, rustling through the yew trees on the rise. "What did she look like when she thought she wasn't being watched?" Arabella asked. He considered this carefully. "Engaged," he said. "She was always engaged with something. She kept accounts. She read. She was more interested in how the estate functioned than I gave her credit for." He fell silent for a moment. "She was more capable than I understood while she was alive." Arabella offered no words, yet she attended to his every utterance with the same thoroughness she gave the portraits. "Would you like to see the portrait?" she said. They located it in the lumber room, wrapped in brown paper, leaning against the north wall between a folded billiard table and a trunk of disused crockery. He removed the wrapping. The light was poor, a single north-facing window, the afternoon sun long past this side of the house, but sufficient. The woman in the portrait was small-boned, with pale gold hair pinned in the style of the late 1890s, and an expression the painter had attempted to render as composure, which, upon sustained examination, was directed elsewhere. Her attention was not in the room. Her eyes, a soft, warm brown, were fixed on something to the left of the canvas's edge, as if someone had just entered. Arabella stood before the portrait for a long time. "It's her," she said. He waited. "The woman in the pier glass." She turned to face him. "Every morning you see her since October began." "Yes." "The same week I arrived at my aunt's." She stated it not as an accusation nor a theory, merely as a truth, placed alongside another truth, to discern their combined form. He looked at the portrait, then at her, and an expression crossed his face that was not quite the recognition she expected, but something sharper, the look of a man who had just grasped that the problem he thought he had was merely a fragment of the whole. That night, sleep eluded him. He sat in the library with an unread book, listening to the house's familiar sounds, the pipes contracting in the cold, the specific creak of the third stair from the top, a sound dating to the 1880s, the whisper of wind off the sea around the north gable. He had inhabited these sounds for 11 years. They had long since merged with silence. What occurred at 3:15 was not a sound at all. It was an absence of sound. The particular quiet that arrived not when nothing was present, but when something had just entered and had not yet chosen to announce itself. He looked up from his unread page. The small mirror above the library fireplace, a round, ordinary thing in a brass frame, its history lost to time, showed him the library, his own figure in the chair, the fire, now lower, the door, closed, the window, dark, and beside the door, a shape, not distinct, nothing he could have sketched or described with precision, a suggestion of presence, the way a distant candle casts a warmth in the air before one reaches it. It stood beside the door for perhaps 4 seconds. Then it was gone. The fire crackled. The ordinary sounds returned. He remained there until the sky began to lighten above the yew trees, contemplating the estate accounts, the East Passage, and the woman he had not paid sufficient attention to while she was alive. Arabella returned to Thornhallow 3 times the following week. The first 2 visits were formally arranged. The third she orchestrated herself, and he awaited her arrival, indicating his expectation. By then, she had discerned the pattern. The pier glass in the entry hall offered the clearest views. Whatever appeared in it lingered longer and with greater resolution than in any other reflective surface in the house. The brass-framed library mirror, the small oval on the first landing, the window glass on overcast afternoons. The pier glass showed her scenes, not impressions, not emotions conveyed by proximity, scenes, with distinct geography and sequence. Rooms she had not yet entered, viewed from angles suggesting a moving perspective, as if she observed through the eyes of someone who had known this house intimately and was traversing it again from memory. Dorinda moved through corridors. Dorinda at the morning room writing table, her pen gliding swiftly. Dorinda in the kitchen passage conversing with Mrs. Sable with the directness of one who had learned efficiency. Dorinda alone in the East Passage, the one with the deep green wallpaper and the gold repeating motif, standing before a closed door at its far end, a ledger tucked under her arm. She was always alone in these images, save for one. One scene recurred 3 times across 3 different visits and 3 different reflecting surfaces. A cliff path, an autumn evening, the light low, salt white, unique to the sea in October. Dorinda's back to the mirror's vantage point, and behind her, close enough to matter, a man. His face was in 3/4 profile, turned toward the sea and slightly away. The detail was never sufficient for absolute certainty, but his hands were visible each time. He held them at his sides with the specific containment of one who had disciplined himself into stillness, small hands with very square fingertips. On the 3rd visit, she told Rupert about the hands. He did not respond immediately. He sat opposite her in the library, the fire burning between them, the rain rendering the windows opaque and dark, and watched her as she described them. Then he stood. "I need to show you something." He led her to the estate office. Cavendish was absent. It was after 5 and Cavendish adhered to strict hours. The desk was clear. Stacked upon it were the current ledgers, closed, the top one bearing Cavendish's handwriting in the entry log, methodical, contained, with the square, deliberate lettering of one who had made precision a substitute for warmth. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the handwriting on its cover. "He has been estate manager since 1899, Rupert said. "He arrived with strong references. I examined nothing closely in those years." She nodded slowly. "The East Passage," she said. "She goes there in the mirror. She is always carrying something. The East Passage has been closed since 1901. I reorganized the house after Dorinda died. I did not enter that part of it." He looked at the office door. "I have not been able to fully explain why." She understood this without requiring him to elaborate. Some rooms remained closed not by locks, but by the cost of opening them. "Take me there," she said. The east passage was narrow and had not been used in 4 years. The wallpaper was precisely as she had seen it in the pier glass. Deep green, gold repeating motif, the plaster beneath showing through a long split near the ceiling where the house had settled. The gas was not connected to this passage, and they carried a lamp between them, its light preceding them in the way single lamps always made the darkness seem both closer and more populated than it was. At the far end of the passage, a door. She stopped before it. The lamp cast long shadows from the carved plasterwork above them. Rupert stood a half step behind her and slightly to the left, not crowding, simply present. Something on the other side of the door was profoundly still, a stillness distinct from the ordinary quiet of an unused room. She placed her hand on the handle. She turned it. The room was small, with one north-facing window and a work table beneath it. The work table was bare save for dust, a thick, undisturbed layer that confirmed years of disuse, except for one item, a ledger, cloth cover, resting on the dust, not embedded within it. She clearly perceived the difference. The ledger lay on the surface rather than being pressed into it, a thin line of clean wood visible beneath its edges. Someone had placed it here after the dust had accumulated, placed it and departed. The door had been locked, or had seemed locked. She wasn't certain she had tried it properly, yet the ledger had been positioned here by someone who intended for it to be discovered. She opened it. The entries were in a hand she recognized from the estate office. Cavendish's hand, but this ledger differed from the current ones. The dates spanned from 1899 to the summer of 1901. Figures in the left column, sums allocated for specific estate purposes, drainage, fencing, quarterly wages. Descriptions in the right. And then a third column, added in a different ink, slightly darker, the pen pressed differently. A woman's hand, also efficient, but with a distinct quality of deliberateness, that documented in clear figures where the sums had actually gone, which was not where the left column claimed. The discrepancies were not minor. Arabella read down the third column, needing no further glance at the first two to grasp the full implications. She kept parallel accounts, she said. She found the discrepancy in the main ledger, and she built the proof column herself. She looked up. The lamp cast deep, distinct shadows in the room. "This is complete." She was ready. Rupert remained silent. She looked at his face and found it had grown profoundly still. The stillness that was not indifference, but its antithesis. The stillness of one receiving information that reorganizes every preceding assumption. "She was ready to show you," Arabella said. "She died in October." His voice remained even. She had been compiling this since the summer. He knew. Neither of them framed it as a question. She should not have gone alone. She acknowledged this even as she acted. She knew it as she sought Rupert's permission to walk the estate grounds that morning and observed his gaze, which conveyed his understanding that her request was not quite as stated. She knew it as she fastened her coat at Thornhallow's north gate and set out along the path she had observed in a dozen mirrors. But there was a truth she needed to grasp that no mirror could convey. She needed to stand at the site of the event and comprehend its geometry. The distance from the path's edge to the rocks below, the path's narrowest width, whether the mechanics of a fall there necessitated intent from more than one person, or if one could achieve it alone. The cliff walk was narrow and had become overgrown since the estate ceased maintaining this section 4 years prior. The seagrass reached knee-high in places, its tips browned by October, and the wind swept inland from the water, cold and relentless. She had walked for 20 minutes before the sea became visible, first as a sound, then as a scent, then as a long storm-grey line where the land ended and the light shifted. She followed the path to the spot she had seen in the mirrors. It was identifiable by the angle of the headland, the specific lean of a wind-sculpted hawthorn she had observed in 3 distinct images. The path here curved intimately close to the edge, the ground dropping without warning from a gentle slope to nothing. 50 feet, perhaps 60, the rocks below obscured by the October spray. She stopped at the curve. She looked at the edge. She considered the path's width, perhaps 4 feet here, the precipitous drop, and the quality of the light at dusk in October when the white salt hue descended. She stood there, contemplating these details, when she heard footsteps on the path behind her. They did not originate from the direction of the house. Mr. Cavendish emerged around the bend of the hawthorn tree, his hat in his hands. His mouth formed a smile. His eyes were engaged with something else, the calculation of distance, she surmised, the distance between them, between her and the edge. "Miss Voss," he said, "I believed I saw you come this way." She did not allow her weight to shift backward. She remained precisely where she stood. "Mr. Cavendish," she said, "good morning. The Duke asked me to find you." He moved as he spoke, not swiftly but forward, with the contained posture of one who had practiced concealing intentions. He was concerned. He needn't be. She kept her voice at a register of mild inconvenience. "I was just turning back. Were you?" He stood between her and her return path. The path narrowed here. She felt the edge at her left heel, the particular absence of ground a cliff presented to anyone standing near it. The hawthorn tree was 2 paces to her right, nothing else. "The east passage," she said. She had not consciously decided to speak it. It emerged because the alternative was worse. Because if she waited for him to act first, she would have no words left, and words were her only weapon. His expression remained unchanged. It was the non-expression of a man schooled in maintaining an impassive face in difficult circumstances. "I don't know what passage you mean, Miss Voss." "I think you do." She held her ground. The wind howled loudly at this cliff curve, ensuring no one at the house would hear anything. "The ledger in the East Passage, with the 3rd column, the one Dorinda Ashwick compiled over 3 years while you were siphoning from the estate accounts." She looked at his hands. She was ready to show it to the Duke in October 1901. "You knew." "You can't prove any of that." "She can." She stated it as an undeniable truth, not a threat, not a performance. A statement of fact she believed utterly. He stepped forward, and she stepped to the right, away from the edge. It was that motion, that single step off the path's edge into the long grass of the headland, that granted her the half-second she needed. Because behind Cavendish, at the path's bend, footsteps arrived. Not careful footsteps, not the measured tread of one navigating uneven ground. Rupert rounded the hawthorn at a speed that disregarded the terrain, his gaze finding Arabella first, then Cavendish, then the path's edge, and the narrow space between where she stood and where she had just been. His face contorted into an expression she had no word for, an unveiling that was not relief, not yet, for relief followed, and this was still before. "Step away from her," he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. He did not confess willingly. Willingness was not an attribute he possessed for this specific narrative. He had spent 4 years meticulously constructing a story in which no one was an active agent, and dismantling it was beyond his self-determination. But Rupert positioned himself between Cavendish and the cliff edge, and Arabella moved behind him to the landward side of the path, and Finch appeared at the path's bend within 4 minutes. Having observed Arabella's departure from the north garden, and having served long enough to discern when observation was the correct course of action, and Cavendish found his available options significantly narrowed. They conducted the interview in the library, not the estate office, not the formal drawing room. The library because it was where Rupert could trust himself to maintain the quality of control the situation demanded. The fire was lit. The rain streamed in from the sea. The ledger from the East Passage lay open on the table between them, revealing the 3rd column. It emerged as such things do, not in a single declaration, but in successive concessions, each extracted by a question that left no adjacent territory for evasion. Each concession rendered the next more accessible than the last. The accounts had been irregular since 1899. He had arrived at Thornhallow burdened by debts from a previous household, debts of a particular character, relating to interests he had chosen not to disclose on his letters of reference. The sums he had diverted from the Thornhallow accounts were moderate in the first year, then grew. He had been careful. He had been, by his own estimation, disciplined. Dorinda had discovered the first discrepancy in the spring of 1901. She had not confronted him. He had anticipated confrontation, had prepared for it, had a set of responses ready. Instead, she had said nothing. She had continued discussing estate matters with complete professionalism. She had given no indication of her knowledge. He had known she was doing something. The closed door in the east passage, the lamp she had carried there in the evenings when she believed the upper staff were in their quarters. He had known she was building something, and he had been unable to access that room, and he had told himself with the particular self-deception of one who desperately needed to believe it, that whatever she built would be insufficient, that she lacked the accounting acumen to prove her suspicions. He had been wrong about that. By September he knew she was nearing completion. By October she was ready. He followed her to the cliff walk on the evening of the 14th. He had intended to speak to her. This was the part he kept reiterating, the passive architecture of his own self-exoneration. He had not intended for the conversation to escalate as it did. He had explained the debts, the necessity, the certainty of eventual repayment. She had listened. She had remained very still throughout, and then she had declared with the clarity of one who had fully grasped the entire scope of a situation and harbored no remaining doubts that she was going to the Duke with the ledger in the morning. There was a struggle. He described this with the brevity of a man recounting weather. She had reached the edge. He used the passive voice for the final part, the grammatical construction that absented the subject, as if the edge had claimed her rather than he had propelled her there. The library fell silent when he ceased speaking. Outside, the rain moved through the yew trees on their rise. Rupert stood. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room for perhaps 30 seconds. Then he spoke to Finch, who had been waiting in the corridor outside with the particular restraint of excellent service, and the constabulary was summoned. Cavendish was removed from the library in a controlled and complete manner. Arabella heard the carriage depart. The fire settled. The rain moved on the glass. She was ready to show me, Rupert said. He remained at the window. She had built the proof. She had everything she needed. Yes. I don't know why she didn't simply go to London. To a solicitor. She had her own family. She had resources outside this house. He turned from the window. His face held the quality of one performing arithmetic that yielded an unexpected sum. She could have handled it independently. She kept the ledger here, Arabella said. She put it in a room she chose because she believed you would eventually open that door. She let this settle. That is not a woman who had stopped expecting anything from her marriage. He said nothing for a long time. I was not looking at what she was doing, he said at last. I told myself it was the ordinary difficulty of adjustment, that she would find the house sufficient, that she had everything she needed. He sat down. I was not asking what she needed. I was telling myself the answer. You know it now, 4 years too late. She is still here, Arabella said quietly, in the mirrors. She chose to stay and she chose to show someone, and she chose to use a glove on a grave to arrange a meeting neither of us would have orchestrated ourselves. She looked at the lamp on the table between them. She is not here because she is trapped. I think she is here because she was finishing something. Rupert looked at her across the table. The fire cast warm light between them. How long are you staying at your aunt's? He said. Through November, then back to Bristol. She looked at her hands, then at him. My father's household. He's a reasonable man, but his house is very quiet. This house, he said, has a gallery that has not been properly catalogued, an east passage that requires a full inventory now that it has been opened, and a pier glass in the entry hall that I would like to believe will show nothing unusual once. He stopped, found the words. Once whatever is unfinished here is finished. He looked at her steadily. I would like to believe you would be here for that. She looked back at him, without adjusting her expression to something more guarded. I think I would like to be, she said. That evening, before they proceeded to dinner, they stood together in the entry hall. The gas lamp in the far corner cast amber light along the Persian runner, glinted off the silver card tray on the table, and reached the edge of the pier glass, warming its carved margin. The ebony frame of hands reached upward, as they had for as long as anyone at Thornhallow could trace the pier glass's provenance, a history predating any current ledger. The glass showed them. 2 figures standing side by side in the entry hall of Thornhallow Manor. The hall behind them, ordinary in its customary late October arrangement, the card tray, the portrait of the 3rd Duke above the mantel. Nothing more. Rupert gazed for a long time. 6 weeks of mornings, the pale gold hair, the brown eyes directed past him toward a door, the expression he had misread for 4 years, grief having kept him from its true meaning. It had not been accusation, it had not been reproach, it had been direction. She had been pointing, in the only way available to her, at a door she needed him to open, at a passage he had kept closed, at accounts that had not been honestly maintained. And when he had failed to see it, when 4 years of absence, guilt, and the mundane labor of a life without her had clouded his vision, she had arranged for someone who could. A glove, a grave, a series of images in glass that only one particular woman, now standing beside him, had been equipped to receive and follow. He had spent 4 years failing to comprehend Dorinda's message. She had, in her unique way, resolved the problem. "She's gone," Arabella said. He looked at her. She watched the glass. "Yes," he said. The pier glass held nothing save what was before it. She reached out and touched the frame, not the glass itself, only the carved ebony edge, the fingers and the stems, briefly, with 2 fingertips, as one touches something that has endured much and found peace. "Then let's go into dinner," she said. He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked through the door on the left, into the lamplight of the dining room, and the pier glass held only the empty hall behind them, the runner, the table, the portrait of the 3rd Duke, the ordinary dark of a house in which everything that needed to be known had finally been understood. Mr. Cavendish stood trial at the Winter Assizes in February of 1906 and received a sentence of 14 years imprisonment. He maintained the passive voice throughout the proceedings with a consistency that impressed even the opposing counsel and was removed from the courtroom without incident. The ledger from the East Passage was entered into evidence and returned to Thornhallow after the trial's conclusion. Rupert placed it in the estate archive under a lock, requiring 2 keys in an unmarked box. Lady Constance Wraithmore extended her visit at Wraithmore Lodge until December, then into the new year, on grounds she declined to specify, though she remarked to no one in particular that she had suspected something of the sort from the moment she received the Sutherland invitation and decided that Arabella ought to attend. The portrait of Dorinda Ashwick was relocated from the lumber room to the small ground floor sitting room, hung in the best north light, facing the window that overlooked the kitchen garden. It was not a room used for formal occasions. It was a room people passed through often on their way to other rooms. In this way, the portrait was seen every day, by multiple people, without anyone having to make an occasion of it. The pier glass in the entry hall of Thornhallow Manor reflected nothing from that evening onward, except what stood before it. No face appeared in the mornings. No shape suggested itself beside the library door. The brass mirror above the library fireplace showed only the library. Rupert Ashwick, Duke of Thornhallow, and Arabella Voss were married in the church beside the churchyard on the rise above the formal gardens on the 14th of April, 1906. The day was clear and cold and carried the scent of the sea from the north. Finch stood at the back of the church with an expression Mrs. Sable later described as understated. She did not specify what it understated. On the morning of the ceremony, Dorinda Catherine Ashwick's grave was found adorned with early snowdrops, arranged tightly along the stone's base, their stems uniformly cut, their heads all facing east toward the morning sun. No member of staff admitted to placing them. No one pressed the question. The carved hands on the pier glass frame continued their upward reach. A botanist from the village, invited to dinner that winter and walking through the entry hall with his coat half off, paused and examined the frame for some time, then made his identification with the authority of one resolving a long-standing mystery. Not hands. The shape was botanical after all. He had been correct from the outset. Thornhallow ivy, a variety native to this coast, very old, that grew in only one direction, always toward light,